Jake Morrison wiped the grease from his hands and looked up at the dark sky above his scrapyard on New Montana Colony. The storm was getting worse, and the lightning flashed across the horizon like angry fingers tearing through space. He had worked alone in this junkyard for 3 years now, after leaving his old life behind. The war between humans and the Crix Empire had destroyed so many worlds, and Jake wanted no part of it anymore. The scrapyard was filled with broken starships and damaged machinery that Jake salvaged and sold to anyone who would pay. He did not ask questions, and people did not ask him about his past. It was a simple life, and Jake preferred it that way. The rain started falling harder, and he decided to lock up the workshop for the night. Tomorrow he would finish repairing the plasma cutter that a smuggler had brought in last week. As Jake walked toward his small living quarters behind the workshop, he heard a loud crash from the eastern section of the yard. The sound was different from thunder. It was metal, hitting metal, and the impact shook the ground beneath his feet. Jake grabbed his flashlight and an old plasma pistol from his belt. Then he headed toward the noise through the rain and darkness. What he found made him stop in his tracks. An escape pod had crashed into a pile of old ship parts. The pod was unlike anything Jake had seen before. It was made of a strange silver metal that seemed to glow even in the darkness. Strange symbols covered its surface, and they pulsed with a faint blue light. Jake approached carefully with his weapon ready. He had seen too many tricks during the war to trust anything that fell from the sky. The pod door was already open, and sparks flew from the damaged control panel inside. Jake shined his flashlight into the pod, and his breath caught in his throat. A woman lay inside, but she was not human. Her skin had a silver shimmer to it, like moonlight on water. Her ears were pointed and swept back along her skull. Her face was beautiful in a way that seemed almost impossible to be real. She wore torn clothing that looked like royal garments with gold thread and jewels still clinging to the fabric. Blood seeped from wounds on her arms and side. Jake could see her chest rising and falling slowly. She was alive, but barely. In her arms, she clutched a small creature that looked like a dragon from old Earth legends. The creature was no bigger than a house cat. Its scales were metallic and reflected the flashlight beam in rainbow colors. Its eyes were closed and one wing hung at an odd angle. Jake knew he should call the authorities. Any alien this unusual would fetch a huge reward from either the Terran Alliance or the Crix Empire. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the way she held the small dragon so protectively, even while unconscious. Maybe it was because she looked so vulnerable lying there in the wreckage. Jake had spent 3 years running from his conscience, and now it had found him again. He holstered his weapon and reached into the pod to check her pulse. Her skin was warm and her heartbeat was strong but irregular. The small dragon suddenly opened its eyes and stared at Jake with surprising intelligence. It made a soft chirping sound but did not try to attack. Jake took that as a good sign. He carefully lifted the woman from the pod. The dragon stayed curled in her arms, making worried sounds. Jake carried them, both through the rain, to his workshop. He laid her on the repair bench after sweeping away tools and parts. The dragon hopped down and watched Jake with those intelligent eyes. As he gathered medical supplies, Jake had basic training from his military days. He cleaned and bandaged her wounds as best he could. The woman stirred and moaned softly, but did not wake up. The dragon limped over to a pile of metal scraps in the corner and started eating them. Jake watched in amazement as the small creature crunched through steel like it was candy. The dragon seemed to be injured too, but it was more concerned with food than its wounds. Jake found this oddly endearing. He offered the dragon some synthetic meat from his rations, but it ignored the food and went back to eating metal scraps. Hours passed, and Jake sat in an old chair watching his unexpected guests. The woman finally opened her eyes around midnight. They were the most unusual eyes Jake had ever seen. They shifted colors like oil on water, going from silver to blue to purple. She looked at Jake with confusion and fear. She tried to sit up but gasped in pain and fell back down. Jake held up his hands to show he meant no harm. He spoke slowly and clearly, asking if she could understand him. The woman stared at him for a long moment. Then she spoke in a voice that sounded like music, but the words were in broken English. She asked him something that Jake never expected. "Do you have any extra food?" The question was so simple and so human that it caught Jake completely off guard. Here was this alien princess, or whatever she was, asking him for food. Like any desperate refugee would, Jake felt something crack inside his chest. It was the wall he had built around his heart, after losing his sister and his squadron in the war. Jake nodded and went to his small kitchen. He came back with military rations, water, and some protein bars. The woman sat up slowly, despite the pain, and took the food with shaking hands. She ate like someone who had not had a meal in days. The small dragon stopped eating metal and came over to her, making concerned, chirping sounds. She stroked its head gently and spoke to it in a language that sounded like wind chimes. Jake watched them and realized his life had just become very complicated. The woman looked at him with those color-shifting eyes and managed a small smile. She spoke again in that broken English, thanking him for his kindness. Then she said something that made Jake understand how much danger she was in. She told him that hunters were coming for her. She said they wanted to take her dragon and use them both as weapons. She said she had been running for so long, and this was the first time anyone had shown her kindness without wanting something in return. Jake saw real fear in her eyes. Not for herself, but for the small dragon that now curled up in her lap. Jake knew what he had to do, even though it would cost him everything. The war had taken his sister, his squadron, and his honor. But maybe this was his chance to get some of that back. He told the woman she could stay. He would protect her from whoever was hunting her. The woman looked surprised, and tears formed in her strange, beautiful eyes. She asked him why he would risk so much for a stranger. Jake thought about his answer for a moment. Then he told her the truth. Sometimes doing the right thing was reason enough. The woman smiled again and told Jake. Her name was Lyra. She was a princess of a people called the Silvery. The small dragon was named Ember, and they were bonded for life. Lyra said that her people were almost extinct, and she was one of the last. As Lyra rested, Jake checked his security systems. His heart sank when he saw multiple ships entering the atmosphere heading toward his location. They would be here within hours. Jake looked at Lyra and Ember sleeping on his repair bench and made his choice. He would hide them in the old bunkers beneath the scrapyard. The bunkers were from when New Montana was a military outpost and most people had forgotten they existed. Jake gently woke Lyra and helped her stand. Ember jumped onto her shoulder and wrapped its tail around her neck for balance. Jake led them through a hidden door in the workshop floor and down into the darkness of the bunkers below. He gave Lyra more food blankets and a light. Then he sealed the door and covered it with equipment. Jake went back upstairs and waited. He did not have to wait long. 3 Crix Empire ships landed in his scrapyard and soldiers poured out. They were Shadowborn, the elite hunters of the Empire. Jake recognized their black armor and cruel weapons. His hands shook, but he forced himself to stay calm. The leader of the Shadowborn was a tall warrior named Commander Vex. He walked up to Jake with slow, deliberate steps and demanded to know if Jake had seen a silver-skinned alien crash nearby. Jake lied and said he had seen nothing. Vex smiled a cold smile and told his soldiers to search everything. They tore apart Jake's workshop. They destroyed his equipment. They found his hidden credits and took them. They beat Jake when he protested and demanded answers. But Jake kept lying. He told them nothing. Even when they hurt him, even when Vex threatened to kill him, Jake stayed silent. Something had changed inside Jake Morrison. When Lyra asked him for extra food, she had reminded him of who he used to be before the war, before the guilt, before the running. He was a protector. He was someone who stood up for those who could not fight back, and he would not let these hunters take Lyra and Ember no matter what it cost him. The Shadowborn searched for hours, but they could not find the hidden bunkers. Finally, Vex ordered his soldiers back to their ships. He told Jake that they would be watching, and if he was lying, they would return. Jake watched them leave, and only then did he allow himself to collapse. His body ached from the beating, but his spirit felt stronger than it had in years. Jake went down to the bunkers and found Lyra awake and listening. She had heard everything through the floor. She looked at Jake with wonder and asked him why he had protected her. Jake just shrugged and said it was the right thing to do. Lyra told him that his kindness had restored her faith in other species. She had thought only her people understood compassion, but humans clearly had it too. As they sat in the darkness of the bunker with Ember sleeping between them, Jake realized his simple life was over. The Shadowborn would return with more soldiers. News of a Silvari princess would spread, and soon everyone would be hunting for her. But Jake did not regret his choice. For the first time in 3 years, he felt like he was doing something that mattered. Lyra reached out and touched Jake's hand gently. Her skin was warm, and the touch sent a strange tingle through his arm. She told him that she would never forget what he had done. Jake looked at her silver face and color-shifting eyes and knew that his life had changed forever. All because an alien princess crashed in his scrapyard and asked him for extra food. The Shadowborn returned 3 days later with twice as many soldiers. Jake had expected this, and he had prepared as best he could. He had moved Lyra and Ember deeper into the bunker system, to the oldest sections that were not on any maps. He had given them enough food and water to last a week. Then he went back up to face whatever was coming. Commander Vex brought a specialist with him this time. The specialist wore different armor covered in strange sensors and scanning equipment. Jake knew what they were doing. They were looking for biological signatures, trying to detect Lyra's hidden presence. The specialist walked slowly through the scrapyard holding a device that beeped and hummed. Jake tried to act normal. He continued working on salvage and pretended not to notice the soldiers crawling over his property, but Vex was not fooled. The commander walked up to Jake and grabbed him by the throat. He lifted Jake off the ground with inhuman strength and demanded the truth. Vex told Jake that he knew the alien was here and that Jake would suffer greatly for hiding her. They threw Jake into his own workshop and tied him to a chair. The specialist set up torture equipment, and Vex asked Jake one more time where the silver-skinned woman was hiding. Jake spit blood and told Vex to search all he wanted. The commander smiled that cold smile again and nodded to the specialist. What followed was the worst pain Jake had ever experienced. The specialist used devices that sent electricity through his nerves, that made his muscles cramp and twist, that made him feel like his bones were breaking. But through it all, Jake kept his mouth shut. He thought about his sister Katie and how she had died protecting their squadron. He thought about all the mistakes he had made and how this was his chance to do something right. Hours passed, and Jake drifted in and out of consciousness. Vex grew frustrated. The specialist reported that his equipment was picking up strange readings deep underground, but the signals were faint and unclear. They could not pinpoint an exact location. Vex ordered his soldiers to start digging, but the bunker system was vast, and they would need days to search it all. That night, while the Shadowborn set up camp in his scrapyard, Jake managed to free himself from the ropes. His hands were numb and bloody, but he ignored the pain. He crawled to the hidden entrance and made his way down into the bunkers. He found Lyra and Ember in the deepest chamber. They had heard the sounds of torture above, and Lyra looked stricken with guilt. She told Jake he should not have protected her. She said her life was not worth his suffering. Jake laughed weakly and told her she did not get to decide, that he had made his choice and he would make it again. Lyra's eyes filled with tears, and she held Jake's hand. She said something in her musical language, and Ember chirped softly. Jake knew they could not stay here. The Shadowborn would eventually find the bunkers. It was only a matter of time. He told Lyra they needed to run deeper into the colony. There were old mining tunnels that stretched for kilometers underground. If they could reach those tunnels, they might be able to escape to another settlement. But Lyra shook her head. She told Jake she needed to explain everything. She said, it was time he knew the truth about who she was and why the Crix Empire wanted her so badly. Jake nodded and listened as Lyra began her story. She told him about the Sylvari, an ancient race that had built the first, faster-than-light drives. The Sylvari had been peaceful and wise. They had explored the galaxy not to conquer, but to learn. They had created beautiful crystal cities and lived in harmony with nature, but they had also created something powerful. Star dragons like Ember but fully grown. These dragons could bond with Sylvari royalty, and together they could travel through fold space without ships. The Crix Empire had been jealous of this power. They had demanded the Sylvari share their secrets. When the Sylvari refused, the Empire launched a war of extinction. They burned the crystal cities. They hunted down every Sylvari they could find. They killed the star dragons and stole their eggs. Lyra was one of the last survivors, and Ember was one of the last dragon hatchlings. Lyra explained that she carried something precious inside her mind. The Celestial Archive, a complete database of Sylvari knowledge, including the location of the Starforge. The Starforge was a hidden station where new star dragons could be born and bonded to ships, creating a fleet of living vessels. The Crix Empire wanted to capture Lyra, force her to open the archive, and use the Starforge to build an unstoppable armada. Jake listened to all this with growing understanding. Now he knew why the Shadowborn were so determined. Now he knew why Vex had tortured him for hours. Lyra was not just a refugee. She was the key to winning or losing the war. Jake looked at the small dragon Ember and tried to imagine it the size of a battleship flying through space. It seemed impossible, but he had seen enough impossible things in the last few days. Lyra told Jake one more thing. She said that the Sylvari had watched humanity for centuries. They had seen humans fight and struggle and survive. The Sylvari had debated making contact, but they feared humans were too violent. But now, with her people gone, Lyra believed humans deserved a chance. She believed that someone like Jake, who would suffer torture to protect a stranger, proved that humans had good hearts. Jake did not know what to say. He had never thought of himself as special. He was just a mechanic trying to do the right thing. But Lyra looked at him with such hope and trust that he felt something change. Inside him, maybe he could be the person she believed he was. Maybe he could be a hero again. Their conversation was interrupted by a massive explosion above ground. The bunker shook and dust fell from the ceiling. Jake and Lyra rushed to the surveillance monitors that Jake had set up. They saw that the Shadowborn had brought in heavy drilling equipment. They were tearing apart the scrapyard section by section. Vex was done being patient. Jake made a decision. They had to run now before the Shadowborn broke through to the bunkers. He grabbed supplies and weapons and helped Lyra to her feet. Ember jumped onto Lyra's shoulder and wrapped her tail around the princess' neck for stability. Then they started moving through the dark tunnels heading away from the scrapyard. The journey was hard. Lyra was still recovering from her injuries and could not move. Quickly, Jake had to support her while carrying their supplies and watching for pursuit. Behind them, they could hear the sounds of drilling and explosions getting closer. The Shadowborn were following their trail. They reached the old mining tunnels after an hour of desperate flight. These tunnels had been abandoned years ago when the mines ran dry. They stretched deep into the planet crust, twisting and turning like a maze. Jake hoped this would buy them time to figure out their next move. But as they entered the main tunnel, they found they were not alone. A group of scavengers had made camp here. They were rough-looking people with weapons and suspicious eyes. Their leader was a scarred woman named Ruby, who demanded to know who Jake and Lyra were. Jake tried to explain, but Ruby cut him off. She had heard the explosions. She knew the Shadowborn were searching for something valuable, And now that valuable thing had walked right into her camp, Ruby smiled and told her people to grab Lyra. They would sell the alien to the highest bidder and finally get off this dead-end colony. Jake fought back. He pulled his plasma pistol and fired a warning shot. The scavengers scattered, but they outnumbered him. Ruby laughed and said Jake could not protect Lyra forever. More scavengers appeared from deeper in the tunnels. They had Jake surrounded. Then something amazing happened. Ember leaped from Lyra's shoulder and landed on the ground. Between one heartbeat and the next, the small dragon began to grow. Her body stretched and expanded. Her scales hardened and gleamed. Her wings unfurled until they nearly touched the tunnel walls. In seconds, Ember had gone from the size of a cat to the size of a large horse. The dragon opened her mouth and roared. The sound echoed through the tunnels like thunder. Flames flickered between her teeth, hot and bright. The scavengers backed away in terror. They had never seen anything like this. Ruby dropped her weapon and ran. Her people followed, screaming and stumbling over each other in their panic. Jake stared at Ember in shock. Lyra smiled weakly and explained that star dragons grew in bursts when they felt strong emotions. Ember had bonded with both Lyra and Jake. Now, she would protect them both. The dragon made a proud chirping sound and lowered her head so Lyra could climb onto her back. Jake realized this changed everything. With Ember able to grow and fight, they had a chance. But he also knew the noise would attract the Shadowborn. They needed to move fast and find a way off this planet entirely. Staying in the tunnels would only trap them. As if on cue, they heard the sound of armored boots echoing through the tunnel behind them. The Shadowborn had breached the bunkers and followed their trail. Vex's voice called out, promising Jake a quick death if he surrendered. Now Jake looked at Lyra sitting on Ember back and made his choice. He climbed up behind Lyra and held on tight. Ember took off running through the tunnels. Her claws sparked on the stone floor. Her wings were folded tight against her sides to fit in the narrow space. Behind them, the Shadowborn opened fire. Plasma bolts lit up the darkness and struck the walls around them. Ember was fast, much faster than any human or soldier could run. She dodged and weaved through the tunnels, following some instinct that guided her toward the surface. Jake held on to Lyra, and both of them held on to the dragon scales. They emerged from a mining shaft on the far side of the colony hills. The night sky was clear and filled with stars, but their freedom was short-lived. 3 Shadowborn gunships appeared overhead. Their searchlights pinned Ember in place. Soldiers rappelled down on cables surrounding them. Vex landed last his armor, thrusters glowing hot. He walked toward them slowly, savoring his victory. He told Jake that his bravery had been admirable but futile. Now they would all pay the price. Jake looked at Lyra and saw tears on her silver face. She told him she was sorry for bringing this danger to him. Jake shook his head and told her not to apologize. He had made his choice and he did not regret it. Even if this was the end, at least he had done something good. Then they heard a new sound in the sky. Ships were approaching, but these were not Crick's Empire vessels. Jake recognized the design. They were Terran Alliance fighters, and leading them was a ship Jake knew well, the Starhawk, his old squadron signature craft. His friend Kate Bennett was still flying it. After all these years, Kate Voice came over the emergency channel demanding that the Shadowborn stand down. This was Terran territory, and they had no authority here. Vex laughed and said the Alliance had no idea what they were protecting. Kate responded by ordering her fighters to open fire. The sky exploded with weapons fire. The Shadowborn gunships tried to return fire, but they were outnumbered. Kate fighters were skilled and coordinated. They had flown together for years, and it showed, one by one, the enemy ships fell burning from the sky. Vex realized he was beaten. He activated his personal shield and ordered his remaining soldiers to retreat. They would return with a full fleet, he promised. Next time there would be no escape. Jake watched them go and felt relief wash over him. They had survived. Kate landed her fighter nearby and climbed out. She was older now with gray in her hair, but her eyes were still sharp. She walked up to Jake and punched him in the shoulder. She told him he was an idiot for deserting and an even bigger idiot for getting mixed up with alien princesses, but she was glad he was alive. Jake introduced Kate to Lyra and Ember. Kate stared at the dragon with wide eyes and whistled. Impressed. She told Jake that Command was going to want to talk to Lyra, but Kate had bought them some time. She could delay her report for a few days, give them a chance to figure out their next move. Jake thanked his old friend and asked why she had come. Kate told him that she had been monitoring communications. She heard about a mechanic on New Montana who was harboring an alien, and she had a feeling it was Jake. Kate said she could not let her old wingman face the Shadowborn alone. Even if he was a deserter, he was still family. As they talked, Lyra collapsed from exhaustion. The fight and the fear had taken everything she had left. Jake caught her before she hit the ground. Ember made worried sounds and nuzzled Lyra's face. Kate helped Jake carry the princess to her ship. They would take Lyra somewhere safe, somewhere she could rest and recover. But Jake knew this was only the beginning. The Shadowborn would return. The Alliance would have questions. And somewhere out there, the Starforge waited holding secrets that could change the galaxy. Jake looked at Lyra sleeping peacefully and knew he would protect her no matter what came next. She had asked him for food, and he had given her everything else too. Kate took them to an abandoned military complex deep in the mountains of New Montana. The complex had been built during the early days of colonization, but was forgotten when the war moved to other systems. Its underground levels still had power and life support. Perfect for hiding Lyra while they figured out what to do next. Jake carried Lyra down into the complex and laid her on a medical bed in what used to be the infirmary. Ember curled up beside her mistress, making soft, worried sounds. The dragon had shrunk back down to the size of a large dog, conserving energy. Kate set up security monitors and early warning systems around the perimeter. She told Jake they had maybe a week before someone found them. A week to make a plan. For 3 days, Lyra slept. Her body needed time to heal from the crash, the torture she had endured while running, and the stress of their escape. Jake stayed by her side, cleaning her wounds and making sure she had water and food. When she woke briefly, Kate brought supplies from nearby settlements and kept watch for any sign of pursuit. On the 4th day, Lyra finally opened her eyes fully. She looked at Jake and smiled. She told him she had dreamed of her home world of crystal towers that sang in the wind of gardens where flowers glowed like stars. She had dreamed of her family all gone now, destroyed by the Empire. Jake held her hand and listened. He did not know what to say to comfort someone who had lost everything. Lyra sat up slowly with Jake. Help Ember immediately jumped into her lap, purring like a giant cat. The dragon had grown fond of Jake too, and would often curl up at his feet while he worked Lyra, looked around the complex and asked where they were. Jake explained about Kate and the hidden base. Lyra nodded thoughtfully and said they had bought precious time. Then Lyra told Jake she needed to show him something. She needed to share the full truth of what the Sylvari had been and what they had left behind. She asked if he was ready to see the Celestial Archive. Jake said yes, though he was not sure what that meant. Lyra placed her hand on his forehead, and Ember placed her small, clawed foot on his arm. What happened next took Jake breath away. Images flooded his mind. But they were more than images. They were memories, experiences, knowledge. The Sylvari history unfolded before him like a book written in light. He saw their world, Sylvana, a planet of impossible beauty. He saw their people tall and graceful, living in harmony with nature and technology. He saw their philosophy of peace and learning. Then he saw the war. The Krix Empire had come demanding the secrets of Fold, space travel. The Sylvari Council had refused, believing such power would be misused. The Empire response was brutal. Fire rained from the sky, crystal cities shattered, millions died. Jake felt Lyra grief as if it were his own. He saw her fleeing with Ember, just a hatchling. Then he saw years of running and hiding, always pursued, never safe. But there was more. The archive showed Jake the location of the Starforge. It was hidden in a pocket dimension, accessible only through specific coordinates. The station was massive, a ring of living metal orbiting a captured star. Inside were chambers where dragon eggs waited in stasis, hundreds of them, each one connected to an embryonic starship. The Sylvari had created this place as their legacy, a gift for a worthy species. Jake saw how it worked. A Sylvari royal like Lyra could bond with a dragon like Ember. Together they could activate the Starforge. The dragons would wake and choose partners. The ships would grow around them, living vessels that needed no crew, that could fold space with a thought that could travel to the stars. The Sylvari had planned to share this gift with other peaceful races, but the Empire destroyed them before they could. The vision ended, and Jake gasped. He felt dizzy and overwhelmed. Lyra caught him and helped him sit down. She apologized for the intensity of the archive, but said he needed to understand what was at stake. Jake nodded slowly. His mind was still processing everything he had seen. All that beauty, all that loss, all that possibility. Lyra explained that she had been searching for humans. Specifically, the Sylvari had monitored Earth for centuries. They had seen humanity grow from primitive tribes to spacefaring civilization. They had debated whether to make contact. Humans were violent, yes, but also compassionate, creative, and resilient. The Sylvari had decided to wait and watch. Then the Empire came, and the Sylvari were destroyed. But before she died, Lyra Mother, the last queen, had given her daughter a mission. Find the humans. See if they are worthy. If they are, give them the Starforge. Let them inherit what we created. Lyra had spent 5 years searching. Finally, her damaged ship brought her to New Montana, to Jake's scrapyard. Jake asked why him. Why would the archive choose a failed pilot, a deserter, a man who ran from his duty? Lyra smiled and touched his face. She said the archive did not choose him. She did. When he gave her food, when he protected her, when he suffered torture rather than betray her, he proved he was worthy. The Sylvari did not measure worth by perfection. They measured it by compassion. Kate walked in, then carrying more supplies. She saw Jake's dazed expression and asked what happened. Jake tried to explain about the archive, the Starforge, the dragons. Kate listened with growing amazement. When he finished, she sat down heavily and whistled. She told them this changed everything. If the Alliance or the Empire learned about the Starforge, they would do anything to control it. Jake knew Kate was right. The Starforge was the ultimate weapon. Whoever controlled it could create an invincible fleet. The war would end, but at what cost? The Empire would enslave the dragons, force them to bond with cruel masters. The Alliance might do the same, even with good intentions. Power like that corrupted people. Jake had seen it during the war. Lyra said there was another way. The Starforge could create bonds only if both dragon and partner chose freely. The system was designed to prevent slavery, to prevent misuse. If someone tried to force a bond, the dragons would die and the ships would crumble. The Sylvari had built this protection into the very structure of the station. But there was a problem. The Starforge required a sacrifice to activate. It needed both a Sylvari royal and a champion from the inheriting species to give up something precious. The archive did not specify what that sacrifice would be, only that it would test whether the new species truly understood the responsibility they were accepting. Jake did not like the sound of that, but he understood Lyra could not activate the Starforge alone. She needed him or another human to stand with her, and whatever this sacrifice was, it would cost them both. Kate asked how they would even reach the Starforge. The pocket dimension required fold space technology, and only Sylvari ships had that capability. Lyra explained that her crashed cruiser was still in Jake's scrapyard. If they could repair it, Ember could power the fold drive once she reached full size. The Dragon was growing faster now, responding to the bond with both Lyra and Jake. In a few more days, Ember would be large enough to attempt the journey. Kate shook her head and said it was too dangerous. The scrapyard was being watched by both the Shadowborn and Alliance forces. They could not just walk in and repair a spaceship. Jake agreed, but he did not see another option. They needed that ship, and they needed to move fast before someone else found it. Over the next 3 days, they planned Lyra, taught Jake and Kate the basics of Sylvari technology. She showed them how the fold drives worked, how the living metal of her ship responded to dragon consciousness. It was beautiful and complex. Jake had never seen anything like it. Kate, who was an excellent pilot, struggled to understand how anyone could fly without traditional controls. Ember continued to grow. The Dragon was now the size of a small fighter jet. Her scales had hardened into armor. Her wings could lift her into the air for short flights. She communicated telepathically with both Lyra and Jake, now, sharing thoughts and feelings. It was strange at first, but Jake grew to appreciate the connection. Ember had a playful personality and boundless curiosity. On the 6th day, Kate received word that made their decision for them. A Krix Empire fleet was entering the system. They were coming in force. Admiral Karn himself led the fleet. He was the butcher who had destroyed the last Sylvari holdouts. Years ago, Karn wanted Lyra, and he would burn New Montana to ash to get her. At the same time, the Terran Alliance was mobilizing their own forces. Fleet Admiral Helen Cross was bringing ships to protect the colony. But Kate suspected Cross' real goal was to capture Lyra before the Empire did. The Alliance wanted the Starforge too. They would be kinder than the Empire, but they would still try to control it. Jake knew they were out of time. They had to reach the scrapyard, repair the cruiser, and escape before both fleets arrived. It was impossible, but they had no choice. Kate said she would create a distraction. She still had friends in the Alliance. She could call in favors and buy them a few hours. They left the complex under cover of darkness. Ember flew above them, scouting for patrols. Lyra and Jake rode in. Kate fighter staying low to avoid detection. The planet was on high alert. Military traffic filled the skies. Everyone knew something big was coming. As they approached the scrapyard, Jake saw that it was surrounded. Alliance soldiers had set up a perimeter. They were searching through the wreckage looking for clues. Jake cursed, but Kate smiled. She told them to trust her. Then she opened a channel to the Alliance commander. Kate claimed she had captured the alien princess and was bringing her in for interrogation. She requested the perimeter be pulled back so her fighter could land safely. The commander hesitated, but Kate's rank and reputation convinced him. The soldiers withdrew, giving them a narrow window. They landed in the scrapyard, and Jake immediately ran to where Lyra cruiser was buried. Ember landed beside the wreckage and began pulling away debris with her claws. The Dragon's strength was incredible. She moved tons of metal like it was nothing. Within minutes, they had uncovered the cruiser hull. Lyra placed her hand on the ship and it responded. The living metal rippled and an entrance opened. Jake and Kate followed her inside. The interior was damaged, but still beautiful. Flowing organic shapes and soft lights that pulsed like heartbeats. Lyra went to the control center and began assessing the damage. The fold drive was intact, but it had no power. The main reactor was offline. Lyra explained that Ember would need to bond directly with the ship to restart it, but the Dragon was not quite large enough yet. They would need to wait another day, maybe 2. Jake looked at Kate and saw the same thought in her eyes. They did not have another day. Outside, they heard shouting. The Alliance soldiers had realized something was wrong. They were moving back in. Kate grabbed her rifle and told Jake to stay with Lyra. She would hold them off as long as she could. Jake tried to argue, but Kate cut him off. She told him to protect the princess and find the Starforge. Give humanity a chance to be better. Kate ran out of the ship firing at the advancing soldiers. Jake watched her go and felt his heart break. She was sacrificing herself for them, just like his sister had years ago. History was repeating, and he could not stop it. Lyra pulled Jake's attention back to the ship. She said they could try something dangerous. If Jake helped Ember, they might be able to jumpstart the reactor together. It would require Jake to bond partially with the ship to act as a conduit between human will and dragon power. It could kill him, but it was their only chance. Jake did not hesitate. He placed his hands where Lyra indicated, and Ember pressed her head against the ship's core. Jake felt energy flow through him. It was like lightning and fire and ice all at once. His body screamed in pain, but he held on. He thought about Kate fighting outside. He thought about Lyra, lost people. He thought about doing something that mattered. The reactor flared to life. The ship hummed with power. Lyra shouted in triumph and activated the fold drive. A portal began to open in the air above them. Jake collapsed, smoking and gasping. Ember caught him with her wing and gently laid him down. The dragon had grown again. Now she was the size of a true fighter craft. Lyra helped Jake to his feet, and they stumbled to the viewing port. Outside, the Alliance soldiers had surrounded Kate. She was wounded, but still fighting. Then the Shadowborn arrived. Their ships descended like dark angels. Vex emerged from the lead ship, his armor gleaming. He killed the Alliance soldiers without mercy and advanced on Kate. Jake screamed for Kate to run, but she could not hear him. The fold portal was generating interference. Kate looked up at the cruiser one last time and smiled. Then Vex shot her. She fell and did not move. Jake felt something die inside him. Another friend lost another person who died protecting him. The portal fully opened. Lyra engaged the drive and the cruiser lurched forward. They shot through the portal and reality twisted around them. Jake saw impossible colors and heard sounds that should not exist. Then they were through. They had escaped. They were heading to the Starforge. But the cost had been terrible. Kate was gone. New Montana was burning, and Jake knew that both the Empire and the Alliance would follow them. This was not over. It was only beginning. The Fold space journey took only minutes, but to Jake it felt like hours. He sat in the cruiser watching the impossible colors swirl outside, while his mind replayed Kate's death over and over. Lyra tried to comfort him, but there were no words. She had lost everyone she loved, too. She understood his pain. Ember had grown to her full size during the transition. The dragon was now massive, easily the length of 3 battleships. Her scales gleamed like polished silver. Her wings could have wrapped around a moon. Her presence filled Jake's mind with power and ancient wisdom. This was what a star dragon truly was. A force of nature given form. They emerged from Fold space near the Starforge, and Jake's breath caught. The station was beyond description. A ring of living metal that wrapped around a captured starlight flowed through crystal channels. Dragons, both sleeping and awake, circled the structure. Their songs echoed through spaceships in various stages of growth, floated in the docking bays waiting for partners. Lyra guided the cruiser toward the main entrance, but before they could dock, alarms blared. Multiple Fold signatures were detected behind them. Jake looked at the sensors and his blood ran cold. The Krix Empire fleet had followed them. Admiral Karn was not giving up. Dozens of warships poured through portals, their weapons already charging. The Terran Alliance fleet arrived moments later. Fleet Admiral Helen Cross had tracked them too. Her ships formed a defensive line between the Empire and the Starforge. Cross' voice came over the communication channel demanding that Lyra surrender. She promised fair treatment and protection, but Jake could hear the desperation in her voice. Cross wanted the Starforge for humanity, but on her terms, Admiral Karn laughed at Cross' demands. He told her that the Empire had already won. They would take the station, kill Lyra, and use the dragons to crush all resistance. His fleet advanced. Cross ordered her ships to engage. The two fleets crashed together in a storm of fire and death. The battle for the Starforge had begun. Lyra maneuvered the cruiser through the chaos. She was an excellent pilot, and the living ship responded to her thoughts. They dodged missile salvos and plasma beams. Ember flew alongside them, roaring defiance at the attacking ships. Several Empire fighters broke formation to attack the dragon, but she destroyed them with blasts of her breath. They reached the Starforge docking bay and landed. Jake and Lyra ran through the corridor toward the central control chamber. Ember followed, shrinking herself down to fit through the passages. The station was waking up, responding to Lyra's presence. Lights flickered on, dragons stirred in their sleep. Ships hummed with anticipation. The control chamber was a vast, spherical room at the heart of the station. Screens showed the battle raging outside. Both fleets were being torn apart. Neither side could gain an advantage. In the center of the chamber floated a crystal matrix that pulsed with energy. This was the command center, the place where the Starforge could be activated. Lyra approached the matrix and placed her hands on it. The crystal responded to her touch. Images and data flowed across its surface. She turned to Jake and told him it was time. He needed to bond with her and Ember. They needed to become one consciousness to activate the station. "Are you ready?" she asked. Jake nodded. He was scared, but he trusted Lyra. He placed his hand on the crystal beside hers. Ember wrapped around them, both her massive head resting on their shoulders. The dragon hummed a deep, resonant sound that Jake felt in his bones. Then the bonding began. It was like diving into an ocean of thought. Jake felt Lyra's mind merge with his. He experienced her memories, her emotions, her hopes. He felt Ember, ancient consciousness flow through them, both connecting them. The three became one, a perfect triangle of human dragon and silvery. The Starforge recognized the bond. The crystal matrix blazed with light. Throughout the station, dragons began to wake. Their eyes opened one by one, hundreds of them. They felt the call, the promise of partnership and freedom. They sang together, and the sound shook reality itself. But then something unexpected happened. The station AI elder. Mora materialized before them. She was a hologram of an ancient Silvari woman. Her eyes were sad. She told them that the activation required a sacrifice. The law was ancient and could not be broken. To pass the Starforge to a new species, the last royal and the first champion must give up their bond. They could never see each other again. Jake felt his heart shatter. He looked at Lyra and saw tears streaming down her face. They had just found each other, just discovered this connection, and now they had to give it up forever. It was cruel. It was unfair. Elder Mora said she understood, but the law existed to test worthiness. Only those who would sacrifice personal happiness for the greater good could be trusted with such power. Lyra started to accept the terms, but Jake stopped her. He told Elder Mora that this was wrong. The Silvari had been destroyed because they followed old laws without question. Humanity's survival depended on breaking rules and finding new solutions. He refused to accept an impossible choice. There had to be another way. Elder Mora looked surprised. No one had ever challenged the law before. She asked Jake what he proposed. He said they should create a partnership, not a transfer. Let Lyra remain connected to the Starforge. Let humanity earn the dragon's trust through actions, not sacrifice. Let the bonds form naturally between dragon and human, based on choice. The AI considered this. It was unprecedented, but as she examined Jake's mind and heart, she saw something, the same compassion that made him share food with a stranger, the same courage that made him endure torture, the same love that made him willing to sacrifice everything. Elder Mora smiled. It had been so long since she had seen such purity of intention. She told them she would accept Jake's proposal, but it would require something else. The dragons would need to choose their human partners freely. No force, no coercion. Each dragon would judge each human who approached, and many humans would be rejected. Only those with worthy hearts could bond. This would be the new law. Jake agreed immediately. Lyra hugged him with joy and relief. Ember roared her approval. The crystal matrix pulsed and sent a signal throughout the station. The dragons heard and understood. They would choose. They would be free. Partners, not slaves. Outside the battle continued. Admiral Karn's fleet was pushing through the Alliance lines. His flagship was approaching the station. Karn announced he was coming to take what belonged to the Empire. He would chain the dragons and force them to serve. Then the dragons emerged from every docking bay, from every chamber. Hundreds of star dragons took flight. They were magnificent, each one unique in color and size. They circled the Star Forge, singing their defiance. Ember led them her massive form at the head of the formation. The dragons attacked. Not with hatred, but with purpose. They disabled ships without killing crews. They created barriers of plasma and energy that separated the fleets. They made it clear that this station and these dragons belonged to no one. They were free. Admiral Karn went mad with rage. He ordered his flagship to fire every weapon at the dragons, but Ember was faster. She dove toward the flagship, her jaws opening wide. She did not destroy the ship. Instead, she grabbed it in her claws and carried it away from the battle. Karn screamed threats, but he was helpless in the dragon grip. Fleet Admiral Cross saw what was happening. She made a decision. She ordered her fleet to stand down. She opened a channel to the Starforge and asked to speak with whoever was in command. Jake took a deep breath and responded. He told Cross that the Starforge was not a weapon to be claimed. It was a gift that had to be earned. Cross asked what that meant. Jake explained the new system. Any human could come to the Starforge and meet the dragons. If a dragon chose them, they would bond and receive a living ship. But there would be no military control, no chain of command, only volunteers who proved themselves worthy through compassion and courage. Cross was silent for a long moment. Then she surprised Jake. She agreed. She said she had seen too much death in this war. If the dragons offered a chance for real peace, she would take it. She asked if she could be the first to try. Jake told her the dragons would decide. Over the following hours, something amazing happened. Alliance soldiers began arriving at the station. They came not as conquerors, but as supplicants. They approached the dragons with humility and hope. Some were rejected. The dragons could sense cruelty or selfishness in human hearts, but others were accepted. Jake watched as a young pilot named Lisa approached a small blue dragon. The dragon sniffed her, examined her memories, then it chirped happily and bonded with her. Lisa cried with joy as she felt the connection form. A living ship grew around the dragon, ready to carry them both through the stars. More bonds formed. A mechanic paired with a copper-colored dragon. A doctor bonded with a gentle green one. Even some of the rough colonists from New Montana who had fought so hard in the battle were chosen. The dragons did not care about rank or status. They cared about character, Admiral Karn. Fleet tried one more attack, but without their leader, they were disorganized. Ember returned after depositing Karn's ship far from the battle. The other dragons joined her. They created a wall of plasma fire that the Empire ships could not penetrate. Finally, the Empire fleet retreated. They would return, Jake knew, but for now, they had won. Fleet Admiral Cross herself came to meet the dragons. An ancient gold dragon approached her. The dragon was scarred from old battles, wise and powerful. It looked into Cross' soul and saw her regrets, her losses, her desire to protect others. The dragon accepted her cross, bonded with it, and wept. She had not cried since the war began. Jake stood with Lyra, watching it all happen. Ember nuzzled them both, her massive head gentle despite her size. The dragon told them through their bond that this was only the beginning. Many challenges remained, but humanity had proven itself worthy, not through conquest, but through compassion. Lyra turned to Jake and told him she was proud. She said the Silvari had chosen well. Humanity would carry their legacy forward and make it something new, something better. Jake held her hand and looked at the stars visible through the station windows. For the first time in years, he felt hope. The war was not over. The Empire would regroup. The Alliance would struggle with this new reality. There would be more battles, more sacrifices. But Jake knew they had changed everything. The age of Dragon Knights had begun. And it started because one man shared his food with a stranger who asked. Down on New Montana, the colonists who had fought so hard were celebrating. They had stood against impossible odds and survived. Their sacrifices, including Kate, had not been in vain. The story would spread across human space. A mechanic and a princess had found a way to end the war. Jake thought about Kate and his sister. Katie. He wished they could see this. He wished they knew their deaths had meaning. Lyra sensed his grief and squeezed his hand. She told him that the honored dead lived on in memory and in the future. They helped create Kate, and Katie would never be forgotten. As Jake stood there surrounded by dragons and new friends, he realized his life had been changed forever by a simple question. "Do you have any extra food?" He had answered yes. And in doing so, he had saved not just Lyra, but potentially the entire galaxy. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness had the biggest consequences. The Starforge hummed with new life, dragons and humans working together, building a future neither could achieve alone. Jake looked at Lyra and Ember, his bonded family, and he smiled. Despite everything they had lost, they had also gained something precious: hope for tomorrow. 3 years had passed since the battle at the Starforge. Jake stood on the observation deck watching dragons and their human partners practice flight maneuvers in the space around the station. It still amazed him how much had changed. A war that had consumed the galaxy for decades was ending, not through destruction, but through transformation. The Starforge had become more than a military asset. It was a symbol. A place where humans and dragons chose each other freely. Over 2,000 bonds had formed, each one unique, each one based on mutual respect. The living ships that grew from these bonds were incredible, fast, powerful, and beautiful. They responded to thought and emotion, creating a connection between pilot and vessel that traditional ships could never match. Jake had become the first Dragon Knight commander, a title he never wanted but accepted because someone had to guide this new order. He spent his days training new candidates, teaching them what it meant to be worthy. He emphasized compassion over combat skill, character over talent. The dragons themselves were the final judges. But Jake helped prepare humans for that judgment. Lyra had taken on a different role. She became the ambassador between the scattered Sylvari survivors and the human worlds. Turned out Lyra was not the only one left. Hundreds of her people had survived in hiding. When they heard about the Starforge awakening, they came out of the shadows. They were cautious at first, afraid of being hurt again, but Lyra convinced them that humanity was different, that these rough-handed people from a blue world had earned their trust. The Sylvari began teaching humans their knowledge, science, art, philosophy. The exchange went both ways. Humans taught the Sylvari about resilience, about finding joy in struggle, about never giving up. The two species learned from each other and both became richer for it. Some Sylvari even bonded with dragons themselves, creating a new generation of dragon riders from both races. Ember had become the matriarch of the dragonflights. She was the largest and oldest of the awakened dragons. Her wisdom guided the younger ones. Her bond with Jake and Lyra remained strong. She was their partner, their friend, their family. Ember spent much of her time in meditation, helping dragon eggs hatch and preparing new dragons for the world, but not everything was peaceful. The Krix Empire had not accepted defeat. Admiral Karn had been stripped of command for his failure, but the Empire military was still powerful. They launched raids trying to capture dragons or destroy the Star Forge. Each attack was repelled, but the threat remained constant. Jake knew that eventually there would have to be a final confrontation. The Terran Alliance had struggled to adapt to the new reality. Fleet Admiral Cross had become an ally. She understood what the dragons represented, and she worked to convince the Alliance government to embrace this partnership. But there were politicians and generals who wanted military control. They argued that volunteers and freely chosen bonds were not enough. They wanted an army. Jake had fought these arguments at every council meeting. He reminded them that the dragons would die before accepting slavery, that forcing bonds would destroy everything they had built. Some listened. Others did not. The alliance was divided, and that division made them vulnerable. Then came the day that changed everything again. A Krix Empire fleet appeared at the edge of the system. It was the largest force anyone had seen since the war began. Over 500 warships, led by a new admiral, Admiral Vera. She was known for her cruelty and her brilliance. She sent a message to the Star Forge: surrender or be destroyed. Jake called an emergency meeting with Lyra Cross and the senior dragon riders. They had maybe 300 bonded pairs ready for combat against 500 capital ships. The odds were terrible. Cross wanted to call in the Alliance fleet, but Jake knew it would take days for reinforcements to arrive. They had to hold the line now. Lyra looked at the tactical display and saw something the others missed. The Empire fleet was positioned in a specific formation, one designed to surround and bombard the station from all sides, but it left their flagship exposed. Vera had made a mistake. She assumed no one would be bold enough to attack her directly. Jake saw what Lyra was thinking. It was insane. It was dangerous. It might work. He asked Ember if she was willing. The dragon rumbled her approval. She had been waiting for a chance to end this war decisively. Other dragons volunteered to join the strike force, 50 of the largest and most experienced ones. The plan was simple. The dragon riders would make a direct assault on the flagship. While the Empire fleet was distracted trying to defend their admiral, the remaining forces would evacuate the Star Forge civilians and prepare for guerrilla warfare. If the flagship fell, the Empire fleet would lose coordination. Maybe they would retreat. Maybe they would surrender. Cross argued against the plan. She said it was suicide. Jake agreed, but pointed out they were out of options. The Empire would destroy the Star Forge eventually, unless they did something dramatic. Lyra supported Jake. She said the Silvari had tried passive resistance, and it led to their extinction. Sometimes you had to fight. They launched within the hour. Jake rode Ember with Lyra beside him. Their bond allowed all three to share thoughts and coordinate perfectly. Behind them flew 49 other dragon rider pairs. Each one had volunteered, knowing they might not return. The living ships glowed with inner light. Their beauty contrasted sharply with the dark steel of the Empire warships. The Empire fleet opened fire immediately. Plasma bolts and missiles filled space. The dragons wove through the barrage. Their natural armor deflected most hits. Their speed made them hard to target. They returned fire with plasma breath and energy beams. 2 Empire cruisers went down in the first minute. Admiral Vera realized what was happening too late. She ordered her flagship to retreat, but Ember was already diving toward it. The dragon was magnificent. Her silver scales blazed like a star. Her roar shook the void. She crashed into the flagship shields and tore through them with her claws. Jake and Lyra leaped from Ember back onto the flagship hull. They had bonded so deeply over the years that they moved as one person. Their thoughts synchronized. They cut through the hull with plasma torches and entered the ship. Ember kept the exterior defenses busy while they went inside. The flagship interior was chaos. Alarms blared. Crew members ran in panic. Jake and Lyra fought their way to the bridge. They were not trying to kill. They disabled opponents and moved on. Their goal was the Admiral. Inside the bridge, they found Admiral Vera, surrounded by her personal guard. Vera was a tall woman with cold eyes. She looked at Jake and Lyra and laughed. She told them they were fools. The Empire would never stop. Even if she died, another would take her place. The Cricks would hunt dragons until none remained. It was what they did. Jake told her she was wrong, that this war was ending today. One way or another, the guards attacked Jake and Lyra fought back to back. Their bond made them unstoppable. They moved like dancers, each protecting the other. Vera guards fell within minutes. Only the Admiral remained. She drew her own weapon, a plasma blade that hummed with deadly energy. Lyra stepped forward. She told Vera she knew about the Admiral past. Vera had been a slave once, taken from her homeworld and forced to serve. The Empire broke her and remade her into a weapon. Lyra said she understood that pain. But she also said it was time to break the cycle, to choose freedom over revenge. Vera hesitated. For just a moment, her cold mask slipped. Jake saw the broken person underneath. Someone who had suffered so much that cruelty became her armor. He told Vera that the dragons offered a different path. Partnership, not slavery, healing, not hatred. She could choose to end this. The Admiral lowered her weapon. She told them she was tired, so tired of the killing. She asked what would happen if she surrendered. Jake promised her a fair trial, protection from the Empire, a chance to live without being a weapon. Vera looked at them both and saw they meant it. She dropped her blade and ordered her fleet to stand down. The Empire warships stopped firing, confused. Some captains wanted to continue the battle, but most were relieved. The war had cost them dearly too. They retreated slowly, keeping weapons ready but not attacking. The Starforge was saved, not through overwhelming force, but through offering an enemy commander a chance at redemption. News of the surrender spread quickly across the galaxy. The Cricks Empire military fractured. Some factions wanted to continue fighting, but others saw the writing on the wall. The Emperor himself was overthrown in a coup by officers who wanted peace. The war that had raged for decades began to collapse. Jake returned to the Starforge exhausted but triumphant. Lyra held his hand as Ember carried them home. The other dragon riders cheered their return. They had lost only 3 pairs in the battle. A miracle considering what they faced. Cross met them at the docking bay and hugged them both. She said they had done the impossible. The following months were busy. The Terran Alliance and the new Cricks government began peace negotiations. The Starforge became neutral ground, where all sides could meet dragons from both human and silvery partners, helped mediate disputes. Their presence reminded everyone what cooperation could achieve. Admiral Vera kept her word. She testified about Empire war crimes and helped identify other commanders who needed to face justice. In return, she was allowed to try bonding with a dragon. To everyone's surprise, a scarred black dragon chose her. The dragon had also been a victim of the Empire. It recognized a kindred spirit. More Crick citizens began coming to the Starforge seeking dragons. They were desperate to escape the brutal culture that had defined their lives. The dragons judged each one fairly. Some were rejected for carrying too much hatred, but many were accepted. The dragons saw potential for change. Jake watched all this with wonder. He thought back to that night 3 years ago when Lyra crashed in his scrapyard, when she asked him for extra food. He had been so lost, then running from his past, hiding from his guilt. Now he was helping rebuild the galaxy, all because he chose kindness. Lyra found him on the observation deck one evening. She stood beside him looking at the stars. She told him the Sylvari. Elders wanted to honor him. They were creating a new title, Keeper of the Flame. The one who reignited hope when all seemed dark. Jake laughed and said he was just a mechanic who shared his lunch. Lyra smiled and took his hand. She said that was exactly why he deserved the honor. The greatest acts of heroism often started with the smallest gestures. She told him she loved him, not just as a bonded partner, but as a person. Jake told her he loved her too. They had tried to keep things professional, but the bond made hiding feelings impossible. Ember landed beside them, her massive form gentle. She told them through their connection that love was not a weakness, it was strength. The dragons had always known. This bonds built on love were stronger than any forged through force. Jake and Lyra had proven that the entire galaxy was changing because they cared about each other. Years continued to pass. The Star Forge expanded. New stations were built in other systems, each one a place where dragons and sentients could meet and bond. New species began arriving. Curious about these legendary creatures, some formed bonds, others simply traded and learned. The galaxy was becoming smaller, connected by friendship rather than divided by war. Jake trained a new generation of Dragon Knight commanders. People like Lisa, the young pilot who bonded on the first day. She had become one of their best teachers. Patient and wise beyond her years, she would carry the legacy forward when Jake was too old. The colonists of New Montana became heroes. Their stand against impossible odds inspired resistance movements across Empire space. Statues were erected, monuments built. Kate Bennett was honored as a martyr, the pilot who gave everything, so others could be free. Jake visited her memorial every year. He told her about the world they had built. He hoped she would be proud. The Krix Empire transformed over decades. The brutal culture that prized strength above all slowly changed. New leaders emerged who valued cooperation. They asked to join the alliance as equals. It was controversial. Many humans remembered the atrocities, but Jake and Lyra argued for forgiveness. They said holding grudges would only continue the cycle. Eventually, the alliance agreed. Jake grew older. His hair turned gray. His body ached from old wounds, but his bond with Ember and Lyra kept him strong. They were his family, more real than any blood relation could be. They had been through everything together, and they would face whatever came next together. On the 10th anniversary of the Starforge awakening, a great celebration was held. Representatives from hundreds of worlds attended. Dragon riders performed aerial displays that painted the sky with plasma fire. Silvery sang songs of mourning and hope. Humans danced and laughed. The former Empire citizens shared stories of their liberation. Jake stood on a stage and addressed the crowd. He talked about that night in the scrapyard. He talked about Kate and Katie and all those who sacrificed. He talked about the power of simple kindness. He reminded everyone that the future they built started with one question. Do you have any extra food? And one answer. Yes, Lyra spoke next. She thanked humanity for accepting the Sylvari legacy. She said her people had been philosophers and dreamers. They had created wonders but could not survive the darkness. Humans with their rough edges and fierce hearts had succeeded, where the Sylvari failed. Not by being perfect, but by refusing to give up. Ember roared her approval. The sound echoed across the station and into space. Other dragons joined in. Their voices became a symphony of hope. New dragon eggs were hatching every day. The species that had nearly gone extinct was thriving. The future was bright. Jake looked out at the crowd and felt content. He had found his purpose. He had made amends for his past mistakes. He had helped build something lasting. The war was over. The dragons were free, and all because he chose to share his food with a stranger. That night, Jake and Lyra sat together on Ember back watching the celebrations. The dragon flew slowly through space, giving them a peaceful view of the stars. Lyra leaned against Jake's shoulder and sighed happily. She said she never imagined this future when she fled her burning homeworld. Jake told her that hope was funny that way. It appeared in the darkest moments. If you were brave enough to ask for help, and if someone was kind enough to answer, Lyra agreed. She said the Sylvari had a saying, "The universe rewards those who share what little they have with those who have less." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, then Lyra spoke again. She asked Jake if he regretted anything, if he wished he could go back to his simple life in the scrapyard before she arrived. Jake considered the question. He thought about everything he had lost, everything he had gained. Finally, he answered, "No, no regrets. Meeting you was the best thing that ever happened to me." Lyra smiled and kissed his cheek. She told him meeting him saved her life. In more ways than one, Ember rumbled agreement. The dragon said they were her family, the three of them together forever. As they flew through space, surrounded by stars, Jake reflected on the journey. A crash landing. A desperate question, a simple act of kindness, that was all it took to change the galaxy. The age of dragon knights had begun. Not with conquest or glory, but with compassion, Jake Morrison had been a failed pilot, a deserter, a man running from his guilt. Now he was a hero, a leader, a keeper of hope. And it all started because when someone asked him for extra food, he said yes. Sometimes the smallest choices had the biggest consequences. Sometimes kindness saved the world. The Star Forge gleamed behind them, a monument to what cooperation could achieve. Dragons and humans and Silvery working together, building a future none could achieve alone. The war was over, the healing had begun, and somewhere in a distant scrapyard on New Montana, a statue stood, of a mechanic and a princess and a dragon, together forever, reminding everyone that heroes could come from anywhere. Jake closed his eyes and smiled. He was home. Not in any physical place, but in this bond, with Lyra, with Ember, with the family he had chosen and who had chosen him. The stars shone above them infinite and beautiful, a galaxy full of possibilities. All because someone asked for help and someone answered.